It is Politics Friday time. Your local voices, and joining me this morning is Wigram MP Megan Woods. Hi, Megan. Nice to see you.
Morning, Chris. Morning, Hamish.
Morning, Megan.
And Hamish Campbell, of course, from Ireland. Let's get straight to a lot to get through. Hamish, I'll start with you on this one. Nearly 5,000 people are now living without shelter, and that's according to official figures from the Ministry of Housing. Should the government take some responsibility for this worsening crisis, given the fact that it was your government that made the rules for emergency accommodation much stricter in August last year?
Look, I think affordable housing is one of the biggest issues facing New Zealand, and that's why we're really going hard on the housing issue. And that is about making rents more affordable. It's making mortgage rates more affordable because we do need to make sure that people can have houses. And we have moved a lot of people from emergency housing into social housing, and that's through policies like Priority One, making sure that we get kids out of motels. And I think that's very important to have in society, that we can actually have housing for people. It doesn't necessarily mean the government needs to provide that housing. We can use the private sector to do that.
But do you accept that perhaps the government has failed in this instance, given the fact that even rents in Christchurch now are the highest compared to any other city in New Zealand now? So affordability is still a major issue. And I spoke to the Christchurch City Commissioner yesterday, and as you know, they're very diplomatic in what they say because they need government funding. But they were pretty resolute. There's a crisis in Christchurch, and I hate using that word, Hamish, but that's what they're telling us.
First, the point about rents. What we have seen, national average, that we're seeing rents decrease by about 2.7%. And that is far different to the skyrocketing rents that we have seen previous to this. We've also seen a huge increase in rental listings, whether it be through Trade Me data or other data, which actually shows that we're actually getting the rental market back on track.
Megan, did scrapping some of the Christchurch housing projects that were supposed to be underway with the previous government, do you think that made things worse, or do you honestly believe that we probably still would be having some kind of issues now in Christchurch and across New Zealand?
Well, there's kind of three things at play here. First of all, this government celebrates that we don't have people in motels, and I don't think anyone wants to see kids in motels. But I'll tell you what, Chris, this government is simply not letting people in motels, and they're living on the street and they're living in cars. And that is something that every national MP, including Hamish, is going to have to front up to the electorate and explain why they think that that is okay, because that's not the city or the country I want to live in. And then, as you say, Chris, that there is a huge number across Canterbury of public housing projects that have just been cancelled. They were planned, they were underway, they were ready to go, but they've been cancelled by this government. So we've got 440 odd across Canterbury that have been cancelled. There's 212 homes that should be being built, that were planned, were ready to go in the Wigram electorate, that this government has pulled the pin on. And that is hundreds of people. That's 500 or 600 people that could have been housed through those 212 alone, because of course more than one person lives in a home. And then we have the fact that we're not just having any of the tiny amount of new houses that Hamish says. It doesn't just have to be the government, it can be the private sector, and they're working with community housing providers. We're not seeing those come through in Christchurch. You speak to Otatahi Community Housing Trust or any of the other community housing providers in Christchurch, Hamish, and they will tell you they cannot get contracts to build new houses. We simply are not getting our fair share, and housing is turning into a crisis in Christchurch, and it lies squarely at the feet of the national government.
Megan, you make an interesting point regarding...
I have been talking to the Otahi Housing Trust, but can I point out that if the government builds a house, it costs between 12 to 300% more than the private market. We are providing over 375,000 people with rental assistance. There's other schemes in which we have, I think there's probably another 100,000 which are on income-related rents. There is other ways in which we can provide housing, and that is what we're doing. Homelessness is a complex issue. There's a lot of social factors involved. There can be drug issues. There's a whole range of things that are involved in the housing the homeless
So,
numbers.
I just want to pick you
sorry,
up.
can I respond,
I
Chris?
just want to pick you up on both things. I've spoken to Housing First, a wonderful organisation with Nicola. I can't think of her last name is one of the heads there, and she said the problem. This has been going on for a long time. She said one of the major problems that we're having is we're not building enough facilities for one-bedroom flats. We've lost a lot of stock, as you probably both know. After the earthquakes, there were a lot of bed sits, if you like, particularly around that Stanmore Road area, quite close to where I used to live, and they were facilitating a lot of people who would otherwise be homeless, but we don't have those facilities anymore because they came down during the earthquakes. And she said we're not focusing enough on studios or one-bedroom places for those who most need it. Megan, what's your take on that? Because I thought that was an interesting concept, particularly if you're vulnerable and perhaps you've got, social issues or drug issues or mental health issues. You don't want to be living with people, but there's nothing really like that available at the moment.
Absolutely. And that's some of the stock that this government has cancelled. So one of the things is that we have an oversupply in our social housing of 3-bedroom houses. What we need is 1, 2, and 5 and 6-bedroom houses. That's what is required, and that was what the build program that Hamish's party has cancelled
Oh,
is about. One of the things that we did in Auckland was a facility called Homeground, which actually was about building exactly what you're talking about, which is studios for people who are homeless. And making sure that you've got the
that is
right stock.
really
But I
rich.
am going to respond to, sorry, Hamish, I'll just finish this. I'm going to respond to some of what Hamish said about the cost of build. Simply untrue. And if you talk about accommodation supplement being the way to cure homelessness, you need to spend more time in the community talking to homeless people. Affording with accommodation supplement a market rent is not the way to cure this. You talk to anyone who works in this field. What we need is emergency and transitional housing. We need more income related rents, and Christchurch is not getting its fair share. Your government has cancelled them, and we are seeing that all over the streets of Christchurch, Hamish.
Your
Megan,
government destroyed our property market. We saw
Oh,
rents
for
increase to
goodness sake.
$175 a week, and so we're making
Nonsense.
sure we're getting it in track. We need to build more houses. That is really clear, and that's why we're going for growth to make sure we can increase the supply of housing because the last government absolutely destroyed it.
So why
are
are you
we going?
cancelling building houses? That's what's
Are,
happening in
are we going
Christchurch.
through
You're
something?
pulling the pin on them.
Megan, I do want to put you up on that. As homelessness also increased, to be fair, under Labour, with the number of people living in shelters rising, I think, by nearly 30% from 2018 to 2023. Labour's track record isn't glowing either, but one thing that perhaps, or it depends on who you speak to, I suppose, there was more availability for motels and emergency accommodation. What National, I think, is trying to do, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Hamish, you're trying to get rid of that kind of sentiment of using motels for emergency accommodation, but at the same point, have we gone too far, making the rules too stricter, and we're actually having people living in their cars, like in Christchurch's red zone, as we saw last night on I think one of the television channels.
We need to get our property market under control. We saw housing affordability go up to nearly 9. So the average house price was 9 times the average income after the last government. We've got it down to 6.6. Still a lot more work to do. We saw that the percentage of people's incomes taken up with rent and with mortgages up to around 50%. That has come down by about 12%. So we are making sure that housing is far more affordable. Yes, there's still more work to do, but we have a mess that we've inherited that we're cleaning up.
So,
But
Chris, if you want to tackle homelessness, you actually have to be building transitional housing, and this is what has been cancelled in Christchurch: the
What we've
ability to
seen
get
is there's
people
been a
off the
glut
hang on,
street.
of
Hamish, I'm just
Sorry,
letting Megan
Hamish, I'll
finish.
houses,
just
so
finish.
community
I'll
housing
just
providers
finish,
can provide
Hamish.
what the community needs.
What's been cancelled in Christchurch? What we're seeing, no one wants to see anyone living in a motel. But Chris, I will tell you, I will have a kid staying in a motel rather than sleeping in a tent, sleeping in a park, or sleeping in a car any day of the week. Our program to get kids out of motels wasn't to simply to cancel the funding and turf people out. It was to
It
keep
didn't,
building
didn't work.
houses,
Our priority
not
one
cancelling them,
policy
which is
is
what we're
priority
seeing
on
under
kids and
this
families to
government.
get them out of
The
motels.
numbers tell the story, Hamish. There are cancelled houses everywhere, and every person who is living on the street, it didn't have to be this way. There are alternatives, but your government is making a choice.
Okay, Hamish,
We have
I'm going to give you the say on this. So the government put out a press release a couple of days ago saying exactly what it was going to do to tackle the problem. In a roundabout way, admitted that perhaps things weren't as rosy as it tried to paint. So people watching this right now saying you don't care about poor people. What is the government doing to fix the homelessness crisis?
That is absolutely not true. We are dedicated to making sure that we can get people into houses. We have the priority one policy, so any families or children that have been in motels, we're moving them to transitional social housing. We have seen an 80% decrease. We know that 80% of those people have gone on into housing. We don't track absolutely everybody that may need temporary assistance. They can then go out into the open market, but we know that 80% have gone into social or transitional housing.
Cost of living continues to bite people, doesn't it? Inflation back up with rent, food, power, rates leading the rise. I think inflation wasn't quite as bad because petrol prices have come down, but I don't want to be talking about that too much because they may go up again as often do. What is actually going to bring down the cost of living in New Zealand, Megan? What if I'm going to give you the keys? You're now the new Labour leader. There you go. There's today's headlines. What are you going to do?
I'm giving you your keys back, Chris. Not keys I'd ever want.
Oh, you never know. Let's start a rumour. What would you do to entice people to vote for Labour to say we're going to get prices down without government subsidies, without saying we're going to put a little bit more in your pocket each week or whatever? What would you do? What would you say?
Well, I think one of the things that, first of all, I'd say to you, Chris, this is the government's responsibility. The government are in power. They got elected, saying they were going to beat inflation.
I know all this,
to do all these things.
But I've made you the Prime Minister to fix the problem right now. So how would you fix it?
And I told you I don't want their job. But one of the things is that a lot of families voted thinking they were going to be getting $250 or $150 a week to help them with the cost of living, Chris, and that just hasn't panned out. If you look around Christchurch and the amount of people that are actually getting more than a few dollars in terms of that assistance, either through tax cuts or through best starts, we haven't found across the whole country one family that's getting the $250 that Christopher Luxon stood up in the election debates and said would be there. That's simply not eventuating. And when you look at Best Start in terms of the number of people taking that up, that is not giving the relief that was needed. We had a policy which was actually about extending out those 20 hours free. So if you start to address what it is that people are spending their money on, which are things like early childhood, so they can go back to work, they can get more money into their families' pockets to be able to pay those bills. This is an utter failure in terms of what the government has rolled out. There's only a tiny proportion of the people that should be benefiting it people are feeling that they've been let down. They voted for one thing, and it's just not eventuated.
But isn't that kind of a band-aid solution? Because what I'm asking for is solutions that are not based on giving more money out from the government. There must be other means. I mean, Christopher Luxon talks about, once we have a better economy, then people live better. And I think he's probably got a point to that. But what can we do that's tangible to lower the prices for everybody across the board without saying we're going to give you more money, we're going to give you a tax cut? Because that just keeps, they're band-aid solutions, aren't they?
Absolutely. And what we are seeing is that globally we still do inflation on some of the things that we import. And I think that's the case. The National Party in opposition wouldn't accept the international factors on our tradable inflation paid apart, but we're not going to be that ridiculous. Of course it does. And I think they're finding that out now we're still in that post-COVID spiral of global inflation. But then there's domestic inflation, and that's things that people really feel at the supermarket. So things like their groceries. So I'd be really interested to know what Nicola Willis said to Fonterra in terms of what that meeting, the outcomes of that were, because I think butter is one of those things. But one of the other critical things driving up inflation at the moment is council rates, Chris. And one of the things that we know is that leading to higher rates right across the country is that councils are having to include in their rates the cost of dealing with water infrastructure. We had a plan for that. That was cancelled, and people are feeling it in their hip pocket now because rates are one of the key domestic drivers of that inflation.
But then again, most of the Labour city councillors don't want a rates cap, though.
Well, the problem with rates caps is they sound really nice, and people think, God, I wouldn't like my rates to go up. You've got to actually go through this and work through it carefully, Chris, because what you don't want is those costs popping out in, say, a charge for waste removal or water charges. That revenue is just collected, but it's not called rates. That there's other ways of doing it. So I don't think it's a magic solution. What we have to do is make sure that actually we're looking at what the best ways to do some of the big things that we have to do, like water systems, and the way in which we fund and
Okay,
finance that.
Hamish, want to bring you in here. The cost of living continues to be high, not just for a certain sector of society. I think it's across the board. So, what is National doing? I know Nicola Willis had a chat with the Fonterra boss. Nothing came of that. The price of butter is going to continue to rise by the sounds of things. What are we going to do? Well, what's the government going to do?
The price of butter has increased, and I think everybody feels that when they go to the supermarket. But I actually point out to one of my previous comments that when we look at the percentage of income that is being taken up by housing, we're seeing that decreasing. That is the biggest cost to a single family, and we're talking about with just a 2% decrease in the average rents, we're talking about $1,000 a year. When we're looking at the decrease in mortgage rates, we're talking about up to $10,000 a year. These are huge impacts on everyday Kiwis. What we've seen wages now grow faster than inflation, which is better than we saw under the previous government. When we look at the cumulative effects of inflation under the previous government, the cumulative effects was 25%. That's an increase in prices by a quarter. We have managed to get that inflation under control. It's within band. That is on top of the global financial situation. We've managed to still get inflation under control, even though we're facing global headwinds. So I think this is really important. Yes, inflation is going up, but we've got to make sure that we can grow the economy, that actually people's wages can then increase. And this is through things like RMA reform, fast track, and actually getting stuff built through $6 billion worth of infrastructure that we've announced.
The Fonterra chief defended the cost of butter, I think, at a press release yesterday. I thought he came across very arrogant, actually, saying international demand and global pricing structures are driving domestic prices. He had nothing to say about what he could do to help the domestic market. You know, I know in other EU countries, they actually shield domestic consumers from global pricing to protect affordability. This is something that Fonterra hasn't chosen to do. Hamish, do you think they should do that?
But once again, when we look at the price of dairy products, yes, they are high, but as a percentage of a family's expenditure, it's actually a very small percent. We need to make sure that we get on the top of the big items that are going to have a big impact on families, and that is what we're doing.
Megan, what do you make of this? Other countries shield domestic consumers from full global prices. We have a model in New Zealand where Fonterra has chosen not to use that model, and that is to shield us from high prices. And he keeps talking about it's the international markets which is driving this. Still seems weird. We're a local economy. We have the most sheep, beef, butter, you name it, it's all in New Zealand, and yet we're paying the most. Australia butter is cheaper, and it's from New Zealand. What would Labor do?
Yeah, and look, I'm not in a position to say that. First of all, I'd be really interested to know if that's something that Nicola Willis discussed with Fonterra when she met with them. She made a big deal about the meeting, and surely that would have been something that they would have gone through in that meeting. But I do want to pick Hamish up on a couple of points there, saying that wages have risen higher than inflation. I can tell you, if you're on the minimum wage, it hasn't. It's gone backwards under your government, Hamish. The people that are doing it toughest are feeling it the hardest. So that what we've seen is that we've seen minimum wage increases in the 1%, and we've seen inflation in the 2% range. So for a number of people in Christchurch, they are going backwards. And I don't think we can minimise what people are feeling. That
Inflation
grocery,
was 7%,
feeling the
over
groceries,
7% under your
feeling
government.
the cost of groceries, when you go to do those. It's easy to say that's only a small percentage of what people's costs are. That's what people feel on a weekly basis. And it's our job as politicians to
5%
acknowledge
increase
that
under your
and to
government.
make sure that we are putting in place measures that will help people with things like their childcare
Yeah,
costs,
Megan, I do want
help
to.
things that their rates don't go up so
I do want
high.
to pick up on what Hamish has said, and let's be fair here, that under the previous administration, the inflation rate was skyrocketing. I think think, by a 5-year high, over 7%. National has got that down to 2.3%, or that's something to, or 2 point whatever it is now. That is something to celebrate, isn't it? I mean, it was at least the cost of inflation is not as high as it was under the previous administration. Let's be fair.
Oh, and Chris, you could look around the world and say that about any country, because that's what was happening globally. You look at Europe, you look at the States, you look at Australia. That in the immediate COVID, the world came out of lockdown, and we saw global inflation rates of between 7 and 10% around the world. What we also seen is they've tracked down, and actually they were starting to track down before the election. Of course, I celebrate that inflation's down. I think all of us do, but what I'm saying is that most of that has been driven. You could chart New Zealand's path along with every other country in the,
Hamish?
in the
Okay.
OECD.
Sorry, Hamish, go ahead.
We have done a far better job than our comparative neighbours.
I think if you just look at the graphs, you'll see they follow each other.
Just finally, Phil Major voted Metropolitan Christchurch Mayor of the, well, I was going to say, I don't think it's that. It's the latest quarterly survey from the Taxpayer Courier poll. Megan, what do you reckon of this? I was looking at this and thought, is this just politics at the moment? This is just a... But then again, the margin of error is pretty low, and it's 15,000 people that's voted. That's quite a decent sample size. Megan, what's Phil Major doing right, do you think?
Well, of course it's politics. The billboards are out. We're fully into local government elections, Chris.
No, we're not, are we?
Anything less. But look, I think as Tracy McCullen said on behalf of all of our Christchurch Labour MPs, whether it's the Crusaders winning, the Tactics winning, or winning Metro Mayor, Christchurch coming first is always a good thing. Frankly, if there were two flies crawling up a wall and one was wearing red and black, I'd be cheering it on.
Oh my God. What kind of comparison is that? I thought there was a very
It's not a comparison. It is talking to my absolute parochialism.
Okay. Right. Okay. I see. I thought you were comparing Phil Major to a blowfly. There's my headline. Megan Woods. There's my headline. Megan Woods compares Phil Major to a blowfly climbing up the stairs. Hamish, don't give me a...
Sorry, Chris. I can suggest an alternative one. Megan Woods backs Canterbury.
Okay, that's nice. That's nice. Hamish, what's he doing right? What's or wrong?
Everywhere I go, I bump into Phil. I think he's getting out around the community really well. He's very relatable to people. Of course, he's well known for kind of digging a ditch, just getting on with issues, moving truck trailers, and I think people really respect what he's doing. And as I say, every community event I go to, I seem to bump into Phil there.
Fair enough. Nothing like looking at some flyers crawling up walls, though, is there? Hamish Campbell and Megan Woods, thank you for a spirited discussion. Have a lovely weekend, you two.
Excellent. And just a big shout out to the Tactics for their game this weekend up in Auckland.